Oh, hey, what you're looking at here are dating profile heights from a public data set of US men. It's what you'd expect, a roughly bell-shaped curve, except with a big peak at 5'10" and 6 feet. Well, maybe some of you expected that too. So, are men lying about their heights on dating profiles? Maybe, but it's also not that simple because a million years ago I asked all of you for your heights, and for the US men we get, well, pretty much the same distribution. So either y'all are trying to date me, in which case I'm flattered, but I think we should just stay as friends, or something else is going on. And spoiler, something else is going on. But proving that is, well, it's not hard, but it's a lot of moving parts that on their own seem obvious, but taken together are complicated. Because self-reported height isn't just a number, it's influenced by biology, psychology, orientation, gender, location, and even which measurement system you use, so don't worry, we'll also look at metric. So, in today's desperate attempt to feel more secure about my height masquerading as an education video, we're going to try to figure out, are men lying about their heights? Oh, and by the way, it should be obvious from the topic, but this is not an endorsement for dating websites. Stay safe out there, people. Okay, here's what we need. Like I said before, these heights roughly follow a bell-shaped curve, though not perfectly. So are these peaks just due to chance, or is something else going on? Of course, if someone tells you that they have the heights of 35,000 men, you should probably have some questions for them. What is this data? Where did it come from? Well, it's from a 2017 public dataset of 59,946 anonymous US individuals published in the Journal of Statistics Education. Details in the description below. The dataset has a 60-40 male-to-female split, and we'll compare results for everyone, but I am focusing on men here, both because lying about height is more associated with men and because my control group, you, skews heavily that way, so I just have more that I can say. I should also note that at the time, OkCupid didn't offer any options other than male-female. They've added it since, but obviously this limits the analysis that I can do. And lastly, I think it's also important to mention that while any identifying information has been scrubbed, something we'll talk about later, and OkCupid did give the okay on this dataset, the individuals in the data likely weren't consulted, even if they may have consented in some opaque legal document. I think that part is important for you to know for determining how you want to engage with this video, and if you choose not to, I respect that. But yeah, that's the data. Mostly. For now, back to the heights. Okay, so here's the thing. In stats, proving someone is lying is difficult. You could even call it a tall task. But we can find what you'd expect to see if people were telling the truth. Out of 35,000 men, 5,200 were 5'10", 4,400 were 5'11", 5,100 were 6 feet, and so on. You get the point. That's what this bar chart shows, and we have the same for the 24,000 women. On average, men were 5'10" and women were 5'4", with a standard deviation of 3 inches for both, or I'll just say plus or minus 3 inches for convenience. This just gives us a sense of what to expect. If I told you I was 5'8", then you wouldn't be that shocked, but if I said I was 8 feet tall like this viewer, you'd be a bit more suspicious. The standard deviation just kind of puts a number to that feeling. But okay, if these spikes are what's suspicious, then presumably a smooth bell curve like this, one with the same average and width as our real data, is what the heights should have been. So, using this as a guess and some poorly written code, we can simulate 35,000 perfectly honest men. How we do that isn't super important, sorry Box Muller fans, but this is what one trial of 35,000 simulated honest men looks like, and here's another. They look pretty similar to our real men, which is great. So is it possible that if we kept doing this over and over, eventually we'd get something that looks similar to our OkCupid data? To answer that, we need a p-value. Here's an example using 5'8" men. Doing a lot of simulations, this bar chart shows that if we have 35,000 honest men, you'd expect to see roughly 3,400 5'8" men, plus or minus 60. OkCupid had 3,489 5'8" men, which is spot on, and it has a 40% chance of happening if OkCupid men were being honest. That 40% is the p-value. Technically, it's the area under the curve from here and beyond, but that part's not super important for us. All we need to know is that 40% is the chance that we would have seen 3,489 5'8" men if everyone was being honest. But what about 6-foot men? Well, this is what we would expect to see, and this is how much we actually saw. Yeah, as a probability, it's just 0. But to be clear, that doesn't prove 6-foot men are lying. All we can say is that this would be unlikely if 6-foot men were telling the truth. Generally, the nerds have agreed that if you're below 5% or 1 in 20, then something is possibly going on. Whereas above 5%, it could just be chance. And does that seem arbitrary to you? Does it seem like setting a goalpost would incentivize aiming for that goalpost? Was this video conceived of as an analogy for a wider and more important problem? Who cares? 6-foot men have a p-value less than 0.05, and that's all that matters. Of course, it's not just 6-foot men, there are way more 5'10" men than we would expect. But it can't just be raining men out of nowhere, so there are way fewer 5'9" and 5'11" men than we would expect, which is funny because it's possible that it's these men that are misreporting upwards, but also if you see a dating profile with 5'9" and 5'11", it could be more likely to be telling the truth. One curious thing though, 6'2" men were normal, but there are way fewer 6'1" men than expected, potentially suggesting that these men are not self-reporting up, but instead down as 6 feet, which doesn't really fit the story that men are lying to appear taller. Put a pin in that one. Oh, hey. Hope you're enjoying the video so far. I wanted to jump in to emphasize that I'm really leaving a lot out here. Everything I presented was technically correct, but if this is a publication to a real scientific journal, then I would hope that the reviewers would reject it because it's not enough. For example, in comparing height by height, we'll be running into multiple comparison biases. 0.05 is 1 in 20, and we are comparing more than 20 heights, so even if nothing was happening, we would expect a significant p-value just by chance. There are ways to correct for this, see this word on screen that I can't pronounce, but that would be a video on its own, honestly. I did do a lot of these checks in the background, so I am only talking about the effects that I think are real, but know that I did more work than what I'm showing to prove that to myself. Okay, thanks, back to the video. Of course, it's not just men who are misreporting. There are way more 5'4" women than we would expect. Interestingly, these extra women seem to be coming from 5'5" women self-reporting as shorter rather than 5'3" women self-reporting taller. Their heights were normal. All of which is to say is that if what you wanted to know from this video is, are people misrepresenting their heights on dating profiles, then we can now say with statistical certainty that, yeah, very, very likely. Cue inspirational ending bit about how math is cool and stuff. We're on Patreon credits. Thanks for watching. See you in like a year. But I don't think that's enough to say that people are lying to get dates. Like, there's certainly lots of pressure to do so. This paper from 2013 found that straight men prefer shorter partners while straight women prefer taller partners. Shocking, I know, but it puts numbers to what we would expect. Now, I should say that isn't universal. Research from around the same time shows the reverse preference in other cultures, and perhaps now is a good time to caveat how limited in perspective both the data and I am with regards to all of this. But my point is that there tends to be a preference. And recently, whatever that means for this script, Tinder even allowed users to filter by height, all of which is without even going into society's idolizing of tall men and fear of tall women. So there's plenty of pressure on both sides to lie to get more dates, but does that actually explain what we're seeing in the data? To answer that, we need a control that isn't related to dating, which is why I needed your help. And of the nearly 1,800 of you that answered my survey, 1,400 responded as male, 300 were female, and 100 wrote in a third option. The US accounted for about a third of total viewers, but here's the countries that had at least 20 responders. Obviously, largely Eurocentric, which should be kept in mind as a huge caveat for everything I say in this video. Focusing on the US, because that's where the OkCupid data is from, the heights for you US men is, like we saw at the very start, pretty much identical to the OkCupid men, with the same average, same width, and same peaks at 5'10" and 6 feet, which kind of puts a big wrinkle in the date-driven hypothesis. Admittedly, I get that my voice can be rather soothing for many of you, so in the off chance that I was somehow biasing your responses, I wanted at least one more independent dataset of self-reported heights in the US. Luckily, I found the US CDC's Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, which is a public dataset that includes self-reported heights from around 400,000 US individuals. That's a lot more than all of you, unless, of course, you like and subscribe. And yeah, it's the same distribution of heights as the OkCupid data again, and this time, because we have way more data, we can even see that for the women as well. And I hope we can agree that at the very least, these heights are not biased by my dulcet tones. One thing that I don't think I emphasized in the video is just how cool I think this is. These are completely different people and completely different data sets that exist for completely different reasons. and yet they look nearly identical. And I just think that's really, really cool. Statistics is it's just really, really cool. Yeah, back to the video. So if it's not dating, what else could it be? Well, we have 3 independent data sets, none of which follow the bell curve we expect. So maybe we shouldn't expect this bell curve. Maybe this is just what heights in the US are like. To test this, I found another US CDC dataset, this time the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey data. This public dataset was smaller, but crucially, the researchers physically measured heights, meaning people couldn't exaggerate. Using this data, I found that the distribution of heights that we should actually expect for men is this. Not only does it not have the peaks at 5'10" and 6 feet, it's about an inch to an inch and a half shorter than self-reported heights overall. And yeah, the same was true for women as well. And I get that a 1-inch difference doesn't seem like that much, but statistically, the chances of this discrepancy happening by chance, it's essentially 0. So this must be evidence that people are lying to get more dates, right? Well, once you start really thinking about it, that explanation starts to not make much sense. For example, because women typically report as preferring taller men, it makes sense for men to over-exaggerate their heights. But using that same logic, it makes much less sense for women to do the same. The other problem is that, remember, you US viewers are also an inch over what we would expect for measured heights, and so are the 400,000 people in the CDC self-reported height dataset. Admittedly, the collection of measured heights was interrupted by unprecedented times in March of 2020, so maybe the data is bad? Well, I also checked earlier measured height datasets from 2015 and 2018, and from tables 10 and 12 from a report by the US Health and Human Services, I found that the earlier data lines up exactly with the measured heights from the later data. So I think we have enough right now to say at least this. First, there are way more 5'10" and 6' men in the OkCupid dataset than we would expect by chance. Second, given these peaks also appear in the American survey data and the data from you brilliant and gorgeous, not David viewers, it's not obviously clear that this is lying for the sake of dating. And third, everyone appears to be about an inch higher than we would expect from measured heights, which means that now we have to ask, is everybody lying? The thing about research is that it's often less of an organized march and more of a fever dream of caffeine, stats, and error messages intermittent with best of Columbo compilations on YouTube. I say that because, well, I'm trying to present things in a logical manner that's not really how it happened to me. For example, one of the things we haven't really talked about yet is orientation, gay, straight, or bi. Now, given we've already seen 3 independent data sets with essentially the same distribution of self-reported heights, I wasn't really expecting anything to change if we just looked at non-straight men, which of course then is not what happened. Yeah, the heights are quite different from what we've been seeing up until now, though given they still follow a bell curve, it might not be obvious just by looking at it. We gotta do some more stats. Out of 35,000 men, 4,700 self-reported as not straight, so around 13%, and they came in at an average around 5'10" plus or minus 3 inches. That's in line with what we saw for all men in the OkCupid data, but that's kind of where the similarities end. First, there's no longer a peak at 6 feet. I hope that's pretty obvious, but maybe not as obvious is that there's no peak at 5'10" either. Well, clearly that's a lie. The average is 5'10", and there is a peak at 5'10" as we would expect. What I mean is that there isn't more than we would expect. The peak is not a suspicious one. Its p-value is greater than 0.05, unlike when we looked at everybody together or even when we just looked at straight men only. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Size matters. By which, of course, I mean effect size. If you wanted to cheat someone at coin tosses, you wouldn't bring up a coin that always came up heads because that would be pretty obvious right away. A coin that instead came up heads only 60% of the time would be much harder to detect.
The game was rigged from the start.
The smaller the effect, the more data you need to prove that the effect is there. So, is the lack of suspicious peaks at 5'10" and 6 feet because non-straight men are self-reporting their heights in a fundamentally different way, or is it just because we have like a tenth of the data? Testing this is actually pretty easy, though I'll leave the fine details in the description. What we want to know is, does a random sample of 4,700 men, independent of orientation, look like the distribution of heights for the 4,700 non-straight men? Well, that p-value turns out to be around 0.16 zeros and then a 0.03. So yeah, it's much less than 0.05, meaning that the lack of suspicious peaks is probably not due to having fewer non-straight men, but because they are actually self-reporting differently. And to really hammer that in, I think now is a good time to finally show you how the heights for the 3,500 non-straight women looks like. Because not only do their heights look very similar to the heights of straight women, the p-value between the two is 0.06. So unlike men, the way that women self-report their heights doesn't appear to depend on orientation. All of which I think is really, really cool. Fundamentally, a self-reported height isn't just a number, it's also this weird mix of how we see ourselves, how we want to be seen, and how we think others want to see us. And while I wasn't able to find an equivalent paper about partner preferences for non-straight people, research is really lacking here, it's not hard to imagine that height preferences change with orientation. Still though, as excited as I was to see this result, this was also around the time that I found this. An article on 70,000 OkCupid dating profiles scraped and publicly released without permission. And the researchers' responses to being questioned on the ethics of this, well, let's just say that I wasn't a big fan. And I was devastated when I found this. Months of work all gone, and I just sat around thinking, what was I going to do? There was no way that I could proceed with the video. That was the obvious part. But more generally, I felt like I was letting down supporters, which was not a good feeling. So how does this video exist then? Well, I reached out to a friend saying I was canceling the video, and she did something pretty novel. Actually read the article instead of just looking at the headlines like I did, and pointed out that this wasn't actually the data I was working with. Yeah, there are two OkCupid datasets with nearly the same amount of people in them. The one that I was using, which had the OK from OkCupid and removed user information, and the second one which did not have permission and did little to make sure people's identities were hidden. Funny enough, I did know of this dataset, but I had forgotten about it because of all the things that they did take. Height was one of the few things that they didn't. So yeah, that was a thing. And while that should have been a happy moment, months of work were not gone to waste, it wasn't. And it really took the wind out of the sails of the project. Which is why I wanted to put this part into the video, as setbacks like this are part of any creative endeavor, whether it's making an art piece or an academic publication. There are big highs and even bigger lows, and sometimes you can even finish the thing only to find no one engaging with it, which is maybe the worst outcome. I have no doubt that the amount of time it took me to make this will probably hurt it algorithmically, but that's a fundamental part of the process, and I didn't want to hide that part of it for anybody wanting to do something similar. So anyway, after that existential crisis and a brief trip to Miniature Wunderland in Hamburg, which I really want to make a video about one day, there was still one thing left over. Even if it's the case that gay and bi men are less likely to overreport as 6 feet than straight men, it still leaves the fact that everyone, regardless of everything else, is still about an inch over the measured heights. And I think we have to finally stop dancing around the question that the metric users have probably been asking this entire time. What in the world are you talking about? In some ways, 6 feet makes sense. Statistically, most heights fall roughly between 5'5" and 6'5", so 6 feet is this special rollover number that serves as a goalpost. So, okay, fine. But 6 feet is roughly 183 centimeters, which, as far as I know, isn't involved in any cultural fetishes, though feel free to let me know. So, do metric countries have an equivalent to the 6 feet phenomena in the US? Of the 1,800 of you that answered my survey, 1,000 responded in metric. As you can imagine, while the vast majority of imperial respondents came from the US, metric countries tend to be a bit more spread out, though German viewers were the most represented here. Which is kind of useful. We already saw US people are about an inch over measured heights, or roughly 2.5 centimeters, so let's check against official statistics to see if my German viewers are doing the same. German men came in at 181 centimeters, women at 168, and finally 175 for everyone in between. Oh hey, quick note, heights in centimeters have a much wider range of values than feet and inches, so in order to get a nice looking bar chart, you either need to get much more data or group heights together. So here, I've made it that each bar represents 2.5 centimeters because 1 inch is about 2.5 centimeters, which also makes the visual comparisons to imperial a bit more one-to-one. But all the math in the background is being done on the original heights. This is just for visualization. Using this thing, I found that when adjusted to your rough age, the average measured heights were 181 centimeters for men and 167 for women. Unfortunately, no data in between though. These are pretty spot on, at least within a centimeter, much less than the 2.5 centimeters for the US viewers. That being said, this paper found Netherlanders overreport by maybe about a centimeter, so on par with my German viewers, but Italians overestimate by about 2.6 centimeters, on par with the Americans. Which, personally, I think is even more interesting. It suggests that overestimating height is maybe not so much an imperial versus metric thing, but maybe something that depends on your background. Super interesting if true, but I don't have the data to test that myself. But okay, I'm obviously kind of deliberately ignoring something here. No, Germans don't overreport at 6 feet or 183 centimeters. They're overreporting every 5 centimeters. And of course, it's not just Germans. Non-Germans follow the same pattern, peaks at every 5 centimeters, and obviously when we pool all my viewers together, we see the same thing. And yeah, I did check, the p-value suggests that this is unlikely to occur by chance. Oh, and so I'm not excluding anyone. The average heights for my metric viewers were 178 for men, 164 for women, and 175 for non-respondents or third choice choosers. I think that's everyone now. And I think this makes sense. Say what you will about imperial, and I think there is much to be said, the fact that metric users effectively round to every 5th centimeter does to me suggest that centimeters are maybe not a convenient unit of height. Honestly, hot take, I think maybe the best units are just straight up inches. It's coarse enough to be useful, but you count them up like centimeters. Shout out to the 1% of you who use just inches. Though reading through the comments, I suspect most of these viewers are 5'9". Anyway, very clearly metric men are not reporting their heights accurately, but are they lying? And my thought to this originally was they aren't so much as lying as they are rounding, and I suspect many of you think the same. To me, lying suggests malicious intent, which rounding lacks. But that's not fair. If I'm willing to give metric users the benefit of the doubt, why not the imperialists too? Suppose they aren't lying. Is it possible they're rounding? No, I mean, that's a genuine question. I don't know. Which is not to say that I didn't try to look into it, because it would explain certain things like the fact that we saw fewer 6'1" men than expected, which doesn't really fit the assumption that everyone is lying to appear taller. Obviously, though, going around asking, hey, are you rounding your height is not viable, so I did the next best thing, a statistical model or simulation which would take a measured height, say 5'7", and try to guess what that person would have self-reported as. The goal is to see, can we turn this measured heights into this, the self-reported heights, with just rounding. I'll leave the details on screen, but put simply, when we say rounding, what we're really talking about here are end-digit preferences. People like numbers that end with a 0 or 5, the others not so much. So my simulation tries to see what you would get if people misreport their measured heights, taking that preference into account. And this is what I got, and it's not great. It gets some things right. It gets the 2 peaks at 5'10" and 6 feet. So yeah, potentially those could be due to people's preferences of ending their height with a 0. But it also gets a lot wrong, and it's clear that rounding on its own can't explain the data. So yeah, I was hoping for something a bit more substantive to end with, but sometimes you just gotta make do with what you got. Except that's when I remembered, what about you metric viewers? Well, it turns out that using the exact same model, we can match the metric viewers almost exactly. And the fact that my stupid Liebot 3000 can so accurately recreate metric user heights while simultaneously failing at imperial heights does tell us something important. These two groups are reporting in fundamentally different ways. Metric heights are almost entirely determined by our preferences for 0s and 5s, whereas imperial heights are much more complex, and I admittedly still don't really know exactly what's going on there after all this time. And I get that this might all seem silly, but the majority of my readings for end-digit preferences came from health science journals, because how inaccurately people report their height and weight has consequences for treatment of heart-related health issues. Sometimes it doesn't even have to come from the patients. This paper looks at how rounding blood pressure readings preferentially might be skewing important health metrics. Which admittedly is not where I thought this video would go when I started making it, but maybe that's just this video in a nutshell. Every time I thought I had an explanation, a counterexample would either prove me wrong or at the very least made it clear that my idea wasn't true for everyone or set me off on a rabbit hole I was not expecting. Are people lying on dating profiles? Well, that probably depends on what you mean by lying. A lot of it does appear to be related to rounding. But at the same time, I don't want to make it sound like I'm dismissing the experiences of those who were lied to. There is enough outside evidence to suggest that there is some genuine lying going on. One thing I wanted to try to understand was, why are people so obsessed with height? And there's no one answer to this, but here's my nerdy take. First, it's easy to put a number to. People might hate math, but we are obsessed with numbers. And second, and perhaps more importantly, it's linear. Plus or minus 5 kilograms can mean different things for different people at different ages, but height is just height, and that makes it easy to compare against and compete against, even if it doesn't really make much sense to. But even that explanation is, at best, not true for everyone, and at worst, self-projecting. And look, I'm sure there's some important message about science and inclusivity there, but all I know is that it made doing the research for this video really fun, actually. And I mean, yeah, that was the entire point of the OkCupid dataset in the first place. Capitalizing on people's familiarity with a fun topic like dating profiles makes them, quote, much better primed to absorb statistical lessons. So if you've made it all the way here thinking, wow, that was really dumb, to some extent that's kind of the point. But also, thanks for watching to the end. I really do think studying things like self-reported heights, especially across different groups of people, is a small window into seeing how others see themselves. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm 5'11". Okay, wow, hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that because that was a journey for me. I had the idea for this video back like 2 years ago now, and I've been working on it roughly since September 2024. And as you can imagine, a lot of stuff has happened since then. And I kind of allude to this, but that early video was very different from the one that you just saw. I really can't stress just how much stuff I've had to leave out of here, from papers that I wanted to talk about but felt I couldn't because they were a bit too risque, a sudden art style switch probably influenced by too much Paper Mario, to an extended existential dissection of my channel when I thought I'd have to scrap this entire video, arguably multiple times. It's probably enough to fill up another 20 plus minutes of behind the scenes material, which is actually exactly what I did, and you can watch that over now on Nebula. Yeah, that's right. Not David is on Nebula now. And like, listen, I literally made a video about who you watch on YouTube. I know you already watch a lot of Nebula creators, people like Angela Collier, Wendover Productions, Jacob Geller, Maggie May Fish, and a bunch of other stuff. I see the freaky stuff y'all are into. And I know you also probably know creators use Nebula to upload original videos, extended thoughts, bonus videos, or even premiere content like a month early. But like, here's the thing, it takes me forever to make a video, and I'll probably do some behind the scenes of that process, how I did an effect in Blender or DaVinci Resolve, but really, I'm not saying you should check out Nebula to watch my stuff specifically. I'm saying it because I know you already watch a lot of the people on there, and they're doing some really cool stuff, some of which is only on Nebula, and all of which is ad-free. Personally, right after I finish uploading this, I'm going straight to playing Silksong because I've been putting off the newest Masterful Mimicry episode. That's King K's Nebula original series about the artistic and cultural influences behind games like Silksong or Okami. As some of you probably noticed, I take a lot of inspiration for the art style of my videos from video games, and I always appreciate when someone takes a thoughtful dissection of that art. And if all of that sounds interesting to you, well, right now a yearly Nebula subscription is 50% off with my link in the description. That's just $2.5 a month or $30 a year for some of the best stuff on the internet. And I guess my stuff is on there too now. And if you are interested but still not sure, Nebula even recently started an all-access free trial if you just want to check some stuff out. But for me, I just think it's cool that Nebula thought my stuff was worth including with all of the other creators that I've genuinely been watching for many years now. Thanks a bunch, and I'll see you at some point eventually. I don't know, these videos are kind of getting away from me.